everyone. We are here with the panel on fostering a high-performance culture. So we're going to dive right into this. I'm actually going to let folks introduce themselves this time. So with that, why don't we start, I guess, going directionally, actually alphabetically, maybe would be easier. Bruce, do you want to get started?
Sure. Hi, my name is Bruce Wang. I'm a director of engineering at Netflix for the API systems team. We sort of handle all the different Netflix APIs, internal and external. I've also worked for many different startups, kind of different environments. And so Netflix is the biggest company I've worked for. So it's been an interesting time.
Awesome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm Kat Miller. I'm VP of Engineering at Flatiron Health, which is based in New York City. And our mission is to learn from the experience of every cancer patient. During my tenure there, we've grown from roughly 30 people to over 1,000 and gone through an acquisition. And before that, my background is startups, primarily in health tech.
Awesome. And Marian, I see we have probably, oh, there we go. We had the wrong overlay. Now we got the right overlay. Go ahead.
Okay, so hello everyone, I'm a VP of Engineering at Mews in Prague, Czech Republic. I've been basically programming since age 11 and experienced a typical geeky path from, starting from a developer, moving to a team leader position, software architect, and ended up in a solid leadership role. And I lead roughly a dozen of different development teams, so I'm focused primarily on leadership and, product delivery pipeline. So I might say it comes down to helping people grow and making things work. And in addition to that, I lead people here in Plateau in circles, and I'm mentoring and helping other managers around the globe to really do their best and mentor them throughout. So feel free to book a session with me if available.
Excellent. There we go. We're going to dive into this first question. So this first couple questions, we're just going to do a little bit of like a round the room, if you will. So starting with Bruce, then Kat, then Marian. So this first one is, what do you consider to be a high performance culture? Bruce, your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think the two big pieces is like high accountability and high psychological safety. And what that will help do is create sort of a learning environment. And I think nowadays, I also want to add sustainable. So you want to have a sustainable learning environment that will help you create a high performance culture. And the sustainable means you do it in a way that doesn't burn your people out, doesn't cause tons of stress. Do it in a way where you're planning for the future, building for the future. And so those are kind of the key elements for me. I mean, we could probably have a really long talk about the details of that. But I actually post About Me page that talks about sort of these concepts. And so for me, these are really important. Yeah.
Awesome. Kat?
Okay, sorry. I'm getting a delay turning off my mic, turning off my mute. So sorry about that. I'll definitely +1 on sustainability and those things. But to me, the fundamentals of a high performance culture and what you're trying to build towards is to be able to allow everyone on a team, engineer, PM, or otherwise, to bring their own creativity and their own problem solving to the table. So you want people who, when you ask them to, make that button green, will tell you that actually all the other buttons are green and that would be really confusing, or actually I could build a tool that will let you build your own buttons, so maybe I don't have to do it again. You want to build an environment where people are not just doing tasks and churning through the work, but really bringing their whole selves to the table.
And Marian, rather.
Yeah, to me, really the high performance culture is mainly about trust, because I see teams, when we see my teams, I see my teams trusted within the company. That's something which reflects the high performance culture for me too. Therefore, the teams are considered to be efficient and have a good marketing pedigree, and ultimately it leads to a higher level of motivation, having teams that deliver most of the ambitious goals, getting satisfaction and becoming proud of themselves. And the way how, for example, our team succeed in gaining trust is transparency. That means, for example, across the company, we communicate transparently our progress, confidence levels, around the objectives, and all the usual stuff around, I have to say. Yeah.
Interesting to hear all your perspectives. So now that we've kind of defined what high performance culture is, now the question is how to get there. So in that regard, would love to hear from each of you any tips or tricks, or just any kind of brief advice on how to cultivate a high performance culture. So yeah, start again with Bruce.
Yeah. There's a lot. I think one thing that I find to be really useful or really powerful is having a really clear purpose, whether you have a clear purpose in your company or within your team, right? And establishing that like purpose and identity is so important for the team. I joined Netflix about 1.5 years ago, and sort of driving. I'm thinking back, like what have I done over the last 1.5 years? I mean, I've done a lot, but I feel like one of the big things was helping to kind of build, that identity for the team, and saying, here's who we are and where we want to go over the next three years. I mean, the team was fantastic at execution, really amazing engineers, but really having a stronger identity and purpose, and be able to like message that to other teams within Netflix, and just understanding where the team, how the teams are constructed, where you want to go, I think really helps drive a lot of the other pieces. Also, if you look at Netflix culture blog or the memo, things like having transparency, context over control, freedom, responsibility. I mean, all those things are so important. Feedback, being radically candid, with each other, but do it in a way that is kind and meaningful, is also really important. And so I think all those things are also super important. I know Kat mentioned earlier about the transparency. That's like really, really key. What's interesting is like, we almost have too much data information. You get like memo overload, and there's just so much data. And so you also have to be good about like, sifting through the data and figuring out what makes most sense for your team to focus on. And I think these are all like really important to build that culture, because you want to be accountable for the tasks you do, but what tasks do you work on, right? As Kat mentioned earlier, like you want your engineers to have the freedom to build the right things, but what thing are they trying to build? Where are they trying to go? I think is super important to have.
Kat, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two big pieces for me. The first, and I think this goes to the statement, Bruce's statement of purpose, is hand down goals, not tasks. So your goal isn't to build that application. Your goal is to enable your customers to do X, Y, and Z. And the more you can hand that down at every level, from your highest level executives to your Scrum teams, I think the more you give people the freedom to play and to solve problems, frankly, better than you can as a leader. So I think that's a big piece of creating a lot of what we're talking about here in terms of like vision, psychological safety, like all those pieces. And I think the other piece that has to be said is how you incentivize things. So I think we've all had experiences with our career ladders, explicitly or implicitly incentivizing the things that we did not want. A classic case is building, I think it's the Google case of like, incentivize building new things and not maintenance. Certainly, I think over the many years that we've evolved our career ladder, we're constantly trying to kind of change it and make sure that it's incentivizing the things we really need as a company. And for example, like maintenance and evolution of existing systems is really important, and typically is when you have an existing company. And so I think that element of like, how do you think about what you're incentivizing, and frankly, what you hire for? It's the same thing when you're thinking about hiring. What values do you hire for? What values and tasks do you incentivize? I think are also a big part of what your culture ends up being.
Marian, your thoughts?
Yeah, to me, there's one thing in terms of the high performance culture that such culture can be hardly achieved without the culture of openness. And actually, openness is one of the values our company lives by. And of course, it creates certain funny moments as well. But to me, having people telling things as they feel them, raising their hand without fear, or maybe asking improper or even stupid questions, that's the right atmosphere, right? So that leads us back to really the psychological safety, which we refer to. That's the the first element here. But the second element, which I see sometimes, is we should be looking at ourselves as managers or VPs. What I mean to say is, for example, me as an engineering VP leading the teams, I ask myself all the time, am I the high performance leader? Do I lead by example? Am I making continuous improvements? Am I giving direct feedback? Because I can't expect to lead and retain a high performing environment when my own performance is sort of a subpar, right? So what I mean to say is we should be really leading by example here, right?
So I hear a lot of threads about passing down the goals themselves so that people have their own sense of meaning and motivation and purpose, and setting and leading by example. And I mean, I think of Netflix in particular because there's y'all are famous for a lot of the cultural definitions that you've provided to the tech industry. So I love a lot of the stuff that's come from that. With this next question, before we get into that, I want to mention we have Q&A that folks can ask themselves. Go into the Q&A tab on the side, ask your questions, upvote other folks' questions. I just got one more question I'm going to ask each person, and then I'd love to get to your questions soon. So if you have, the more questions we have, the faster we'll get to your questions. So with that, we'll have this last question that we'll go to each person for. This one is, what are the challenges you have had sustaining high performance culture over time? I imagine they are limitless. So maybe if you pick, the top one or two that comes to your mind. Bruce, feel free to start.
You want to flip it around and go the opposite order?
Yeah, sure. Why not? I'm not opposed.
We'll do game time decision. Yeah.
Or any of the three of you that feel that you have a good answer to this first.
Yeah. So let me go first, maybe. So
go for it.
To me, I think the issue which I find is retention, because maybe retention is the issue. So I think that what helps is to create an environment where people are to make people still available and not leaving us. It's about to create an environment where people are free to, for example, to learn, to share the knowledge, making learning opportunity inclusive, sort of to a certain extent, right? And when they feel they still can expand their skills, they tend to stay with us. And on top, we, for example, allow them to innovate and experiment by providing a dedicated time and space for that. So ultimately, it leads us to a culture where constant learning is a norm, right? And there might be other things like what to measure, or how to prevent the situations. But I want to open the space for others, for Catherine as well.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think only the most lucky people are not dealing with attrition right now. The market is wild. The thing I would say about attrition is I think you can extend someone's time at your company from 2 years to 3 or 4 years, but ultimately people leave for all sorts of reasons that have to do with them. It has to do with the company, like what they want their life to be like. Some people become more sensitive to compensation or stability or all sorts of things over time. So you're ultimately not going to hold on to your people forever. You're just giving them a reason to stay longer than they would otherwise, and it's still going to happen. I think something that I've seen really be problematic is that work evolves over time as a company, especially as I've gone through from sort of a startup to a mature business. You go from building lots of new things with string and duct tape through, sort of major product goals, all the way to, okay, now we actually have to keep doing this and fix all the stuff that we did really badly along the way, right? And so each of those phases, I think you have to redirect the team and redirect the goals, and you run the risk of having a high burden of operational work relative to things that feel creative and fun for your team. So I'd say that's the thing that I've been continually navigating and kind of continually struggling with over the last 10 years is if you're successful, you've probably created a lot of tech debt for yourself. And how do you incentivize your teams to be high performing and encourage them to be creative, when in the reality, they have to migrate from Python 2 to Python 3 at some point, and it's not going to be very interesting.
Bruce, your thoughts?
Yes, plus 1,000 to capture. I mean, we run like 4 API stacks here. It's like 10 plus years, been around since the beginning of streaming, right? And just maintenance and migrations is just like what you do, right? It's your job, especially as you get bigger. My big thing, and I'm on vacation right now, so this is my fear. It's what I call fear of not being stunning. At Netflix, we use terms like dream team and stunning colleagues. I mean, who says stunning colleagues? That's like a really high bar. And I think the problem there is you can get trapped in that, right? You have a fear like, oh, what am I missing? I didn't open up my laptop this whole trip, right? Except yesterday. And I got a bunch of Slack messages like, oh crap. One from my VP who was asking me a question. But it was great. She was like, hey, you're on vacation, I'll ask someone else. But I mean, that's the fear, right? Your fear of like, am I doing enough? Am I growing enough? How do I meet the bar? What is the bar? And I think that's actually a real danger, that you sort of like have set the team up for this high success rate, but then how do you take a break? How do you avoid burnout? How do you avoid, stress? How do you make sure things are done sustainably? As Kat said, like, how do you create maintenance things that are really important to have, like almost more important than the shiny thing, and so I think, all those incentives and the things you put in place to make sure people have the space to be, stunning, but also not be afraid. I know personally, I get worried. You have imposter syndrome. There's a lot of talented people out there. You're always worried about, am I performing well? I know from my colleagues, we joke sometimes like coming back from vacation is more stressful because you have like a week or 2 weeks of email and Slack to deal with. And then it's just like, oh man, it's like super high stress all of a sudden, right? So I feel like that is a big challenge, super big challenge to just deal with when you have a really strong culture.
You're talking about all these elements of psychological safety, which came up in the previous talk we just had, right? And a lot of folks are familiar now with the the Google study on the topic, et cetera. But hearing what you're sharing kind of reveals a little bit of the natural tension between feeling safe to take risks and safe to fail and safe to go on friggin' vacation, versus like being outstanding all the time, being stunning, being the A player, being the 10x engineer, et cetera. So I appreciate the empathy because I think a lot of us struggle with that. This is actually a natural segue to the audience Q&A because this first question here I think is very much in the spirit of what you just mentioned, Bruce. But I'd love to now open it up. So anybody can chime in at any point. Don't feel offended if you interrupt each other or you want to add on each other. I'm going to try and like step out a little bit more. This first question is of Cyprian is how do you foster a high performing culture while nurturing collaboration and a healthy environment? Anybody can take this.
Just a small question, just like, how do you do it?
Yeah.
I think, there's like a million answers. I'm sure we'll all have like our own little handle on this. I think that I want to maybe go on the modeling riff is that you tell a team what you expect and you praise them when they meet that. And you gently encourage them when they're not meeting that. What that means in particular, like some teams use like really intense KPIs, others use OKRs, maybe earlier phase teams just have like a little bit of a roadmap. But I do think kind of to think about as a leader what your role is. Your role is to set those boundaries and very clearly communicate how they're doing against them and what you need to see in order to consider that team successful.
Yeah, I read this question and I feel like there's a little bit of nuance in that question because it's saying, how do you foster high performance while having collaboration? Almost seeming like it's mutually exclusive. And I think you need to flip that around. You're not going to build a high performance culture unless you nurture collaboration, unless you nurture a healthy environment. And I think the problem is you get this like false definition of what high performance is, right? Your expectation is like, oh, you're gonna be like super like cutthroat and everyone's working 100 hours, like it should be like crazy top engineers from top schools. You create this like definition that's just not real. And I think going back to what Kat said and Marian said as well, is like you got to build incentives, and you got to, as a leader, it's so important from top down to say these are the things that matter, right? The collaborations are what matters. If you're not collaborating, then you're not actually an A player. You know that, like, you know, we actually have this thing. There's, you know, we say no brilliant jerks. You know, we really go by that. We interview for that. We critique on that. And if you're a brilliant jerk, you're just not a great A player. And I think of it differently, right? Collaboration is what leads to high performance culture. And so you as a leadership have to drive it, enforce it, and you hire and fire for it. I mean, that's the most powerful tool you have. Hire, you know, promote, and let go people. And that's the way.
Marian, does that resonate with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you know, it guides me down to, you know, all of us fostering the team's objectives as opposed to individual objectives. Of course, we have the individual, let's say, improvement plans, etc. But you know, it reminds me, you know, one specific situation, me being a leader and making the mistake of not actually firing some of these individuals, if I may put it this way, because I experienced myself making the mistake of not reducing the team size in case there's a toxic behavior or a new starter unfit, and this mistake is very pricey, and it destabilizes the environment significantly. So therefore, we shouldn't extend the team span and asking the team leads to, let's say, follow up for another, let's say, 3 months or a half a year or whatever. So really my lesson learned here is to make these decisions ultra fast. So that's, you know, openly saying, for example, I'm not a fan of individual performance improvement plans to get people formally back on track, for example.
To each their own. So this next question, which is also very related, you know, now we're talking about strategies. This one's about measurement. So Sumedh asks, how do you measure performance of a team? What metrics can be used to conclude that this team is high performing? Obviously, they'll be different for different contexts, but you know, if you all think that there are particular metrics that you think might be interesting, unique, or useful that you've identified for yourselves, feel free to share.
Catherine?
I actually have a heretical point of view, which is that you can get way over indexed on measuring these things. For an engineer, I'm less fond of metrics than other people, so I'm sure that other folks on this call will feel differently. But I think that there is a thing that, you know, honestly, as a product or an engineering lead, which is like how long something should have taken and how long it did take. And I honestly mean at a very big level here. So I don't mean like individual to individual, although I think you have that too, but a real sense of like what progress should we be able to make? And like, I genuinely believe that if I ask any engineering leader anywhere, I can ask them about their teams and they can give me a qualitative answer about where their teams stand on that. It's not always the team's fault if they're not doing well. Like there can be processes and other things that are really hindering them. So it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, my team is broken, but it does mean that something is broken in the way my company is functioning or the way this team is functioning. So yeah, I mean, I realize that's not the answer you want. You want like a metric, but I defy you, like I defy you to show me a VP who can't point to the teams that they think are performing well and the teams that they think are not, based on kind of what they believe should be possible.
Yeah, Kat, I actually don't think that's heretical. I think that's actually 100%. The problem I think with a lot of engineering is, you know, we're data driven, right? We have metrics for the business. We know how many users and people signed up, all that stuff, right? But like engineering just doesn't completely work that way. You know, I've seen people calculating points and then gaming the system on pointing systems. Like it's just there's no great metric, right? It's not like, oh, if I get this many PRs, that means my team is really doing well, right? And if you do that, it's going to be, you're doing bad. I will tell you that right now. If you're measuring PR counts, you might have some problems. And I think I agree. Like, I look at it like, what I struggle with is I look at the impact my team is making, and the problem is like, how do you define that? Like, what is impact exactly? And so I look at just like the amount of projects that my team can output in any given year that substantially changes Netflix for the positive. Like coming up with technologies and services or process or techniques that are moving us forward, right? And I know there isn't some magical number. It's not like, oh, I need 2 per engineer. It's just more like, how many are we doing? Like, can I count and say, oh man, these are all the projects that my team has come up with that might have taken 1 to 12 months to do or more, right? And I use that as my metric. It's like, hey, if we're outputting stuff really well, we're thinking for the future, we're building things that make sense, and we're like moving the needle for the company. I think that's like I know it feels weird as an engineer to not, but I think that's why people management is so hard. It's not lines of code. And I'll give you a story, like just as a quick one, but like first year as an engineer out of college, I remember working on this bug. It took me 2 days to fix one line because it took me 2 days to figure out where the line was. And how do you measure that? Oh, was I terrible? Did I do nothing for 2 days? I mean, I basically worked like 20 plus hours for 2 days to try to figure out where that line was, right? And so it's an example of like, it's very hard to measure that kind of impact. You know, those kind of like really gnarly take 2 weeks to find this one JDK bug that's affecting you in some situation. It's hard to measure those.
Yeah, I fully agree with you, Bruce. Because, for example, let's have an example of a senior staff level engineer who has a minimum lines of code, right, being really pushed or something. And that's not about to say that he's poor in terms of his performance, because as opposed to coding, he's basically helping others too with the reviews or achieving other stuff and doing the solutioning round. So I completely agree with you here. Nevertheless, like to me as a VP of engineering, I'm sort of somewhere in between, because I use certain metrics. But to me, these metrics are such as, lead time, mean story throughput, mean commit size, deployment frequency, sprint completion, or, objectives contribution. These are the things which we do measure, but to me, they serve as an indicator, not really the metrics about this making decision points. So the way how I regard it, and that's really like the key message here, is that we should treat it as an indicators which help us to prevent some situations or rotting situations, from still keeping on the wrong path of things, etc. So I absolutely agree with you. And by the way, I loved your comment, Catherine, about there might be a team who, let's say, performs at 120%, and he's really highly performant. Nevertheless, the situation is that very same team is not treated as trusted or successful just because of they've been given the features that at the end of the day are not really, have a low to zero impact. And it's not necessarily their fault, for example. So they are sort of demotivated, and via metrics, you can't really say whether they are doing great or poorly, right?
My takeaway is it's all about impact. It sounds like each of you are referencing kind of some context for impact, and whether you measure that quantitatively or qualitatively, or have a set of metrics that kind of tell the story that's really what matters. I want to keep asking questions, but somehow magically the time has disappeared, and so we've actually run out of time. But I want to thank the three of you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom. And I know that there's a select lucky few who will be able to have some breakout sessions with each of you after this. So thank you, all three of you, Bruce, Kat, Marian, for your time, your energy, and your wisdom. I think I've learned a lot, and hopefully the rest of folks have too. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.